بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Assalamu alaikum and good afternoon. Assalamu alaikum. It's good. Everybody's still awake. I'm actually quite intimidated to be speaking here in front of luminaires and erudite scholars who are far more skilled and expertly in this topic. And so please bear with me as we go through what we need to speak about here. I think one of the things we need to take into consideration in this entire discussion about a riba-based monetary system is beyond the riba itself and in fact what it in fact is supposed to be serving and what in fact is happening in the world, because in my thesis to you, and inshallah it will develop as we go to the last slide, there is more for us to consider and a proposition that needs to be put forth which by far and large is missing in the equation because it is the most dangerous thing to talk about. It's more dangerous than talking about bringing gold back. So I will be trying to build my position for you in that regard, and would be obviously, I'll be framing it from an Islamic religious perspective, and I'm sure that can be applied elsewhere. To understand the power of no money equals riba, I would like to share with you a brief humorous story. Imagine a hotel in a village town and some astute Harvard economist arrived there for his or her holiday, potentially using this hotel, puts a $100 deposit on the table at the reception in order for him to be able to check out the rooms. He hasn't yet booked himself in. And then he goes off to check out the rooms. Whilst he's doing that, the manager quickly takes the $100 and rushes off to the local butcher to actually pay for a bill he has because of the food supplies he has been giving to the hotel. Once the butcher receives the $100, he rushes off to the village farmer who has been supplying him the actual meat. The village farmer then quickly drives to the hotel to pay the manager for the overnight expenses he had to provide the meat to the butcher. And at this point of time, the American tourist is just coming down, and the manager quietly puts the money back where the deposit was, and the American tourist says, "No, thank you very much, I won't be staying in this hotel," takes the money and goes off. The happy thing that happens in this story is that everybody got paid, but nobody had the money. That's the nature of the topic we're speaking about. And it is not a topic of money at all. It's a topic of truly ethics. And I'm going to build this story of ethics as we go along, inshallah, in this regard. And I would like you to keep in mind a particular verse in the Quran, the idea of the Ibadur Rahman, the servants of the merciful God, are those who walk lightly on earth. And this is an encompassing statement, and I would like to ask everybody, for those who have, for the Muslims and those who have access to the Quran, to refer to the chapter 25 from verse 63 to approximately verse 70, for you to realize what it means to exist as a human being. Because in this question of riba, we have reduced it to economies, gold and silver and everything else, when they are purely and nothing more than a means to a function of the human being, which I'll speak about, and we have forgotten the human being. I would like to bring back to the story the human being, and in the story I'd like to first share with you a story close to us about fish, in terms of the environmental degradation as well as the social costs of this in our location. Now, in our location, this area that we are speaking about, which is referred to as the Visayan region, and it affects the Malaysian regions as well, but it's mostly focused around the upper North Coral Sea in the areas of Philippines, but it does in fact spread all the way across into Papua New Guinea and the Solomon Islands. It decisively excludes Australia, a country that I come from. However, Australia is very busy in trying to confiscate lands that doesn't belong to it. It continues to do so. And I hope the governments around this area are well aware of it. In fact, the story of East Timor is similar to that, but we'll put that aside for the moment. This region, by the way, is the highest concentration of marine species in the entire world. In the entire world. However, in order to join certain international treaties, the governments of this area have had to sign all sorts of treatises in a manner where more and more of the local fish is in fact exported rather than supporting the local markets and specifically the nourishment needs of the local people to the extent where it has increased poverty. And the shift from the local market to the required and imposed market for export is facilitated by one particular tool, and that is interest-based loans to larger farmers or larger fishermen or fishermen and women of the area. I'll refer to the fishermen and women as fishers. In other words, the actual interest-based loans, a Riba-based monetary system, is funding a degradation of the life of the people in our area. And here, briefly, is for you the global situation in relation to fishing around the world. The data over here from 1900s to approximately 1999 shows us that in fact from the small schooners and canoes to the large ocean bed, basically bulldozers under the water that catch the entire seabed and bring about all sorts of stuff inside there, corals, small fish, big fish, and everything else that in fact comes with it. The graph over here shows to you that in fact the amount of fish, the total amount of fish that was captured over the period of time increased dramatically, but around about the 1975 mark, there was an actual dip in the amount of fish we could catch. In other words, there is an actual fish depletion through the exploitative means of our fishing. And in that regard, the actual usable large fish is this graph over here. It is a huge fishing gap which almost looks like a whale's mouth. This fish exploitation is made possible by only one thing: a river-based monetary system. By funding large corporations to destroy our sea. Without the interest-based loans provided to these corporations, there would not be such fishing practices, which in fact completely deteriorates the fishing market. We move on to a second example. I'll try to use 3 examples. We'll move on to the next example of the farmer, and in that case we will look at the Argentinian example, and we know the Argentinian financial crash and in fact the so-called economic improvement that in fact has occurred, and it certainly has. Poverty, etc. has dramatically changed in Argentina. But here is a very different picture that has yet to see another wave of problems in Argentina very soon. For your information, poverty in Argentina increased up to 50% until 1992 approximately, particularly because of the way it was dealing with its currency, with the American pegging in that regard. I'm not an expert in economics and things like that, so I'll leave those things to the experts to speak about. In this example, we look at Argentina specifically in relation to soybean. Soybean is now a major product around the world, which is commodified. to a significant level. The 15 million hectares that actually has been now dedicated to soybean, which is really used for the purposes of feed for animals per se. All of it, almost all of it, is actually transgenic production. Transgenic production is GM modified foods in terms of the seeds, etc. Now, the 126% increase of soybean in terms of the acreage in Argentina, it came at the expense of significant areas previously devoted to fruits, dairy cattle, maize, wheat, sunflower, cotton, sugarcane, and others. In other words, things that local people grew for their own purposes and what they could in fact sell. But when these small farmers, what actually happened was, in order to be part of an international trade system, you needed to increase the soybean production and provide that to the international markets. And in doing so, the only people who could do that were large corporations, literally the Argentinian government as well as the international governments, inclusive of primarily the United States of America, actually allowed these corporations to take over the lands. And 45% of small farmers were wiped off the map because they were unable to afford the loans that they had to serve by planting soybeans. And because it was no longer able to produce, in other words, if you wanted to produce your fruits, you could only sell it in your local markets. You could not even trade it within Argentina. If you wanted to trade, you needed to have a certain percentage of soybean to be grown. And then you can take that forward into the international market where they had no choice but to in fact grow soybean and ultimately selling themselves out, where lands were owned by multi-generations. And today, as my understanding is, I think it was Dr. Bill who was mentioning about the people moving on to becoming tenants of the land. And the only way this was done, not because of market prices, not because of some market forces, but because of interest-based loans given to large corporations who would only invest a small amount of their money in order to usurp the land of other people in the local countries. We then move from this to look at a general picture of agriculture in terms of the understanding the GM food market, the genetically modified food market, is that the cost per acre actually dramatically increased over the last couple of decades, particularly for two reasons. Number one reason for food prices, for the actual cost per acre to grow food increased because of number one, and these are significant numbers, we're not talking about small numbers here, the price of GM herbicide seeds. In fact, you no longer had to buy herbicides because the seeds apparently contain herbicides in it, but the price was so high that you had no choice but to take loans, and they came with the loan papers as well. Here's the seed, and here's the paper to sign, no problem. You can sign today, and we will give you the seeds. And the second reason was this particular point that I've just made, and that is the loans to produce the large harvests to maintain, to meet the production costs. Now, here is what happens in terms of return. So this idea that genetically modified foods is in fact allowing the world to have more food is another big bogus. It's nothing more than business for the agribusiness. That in fact the return per acre has become so small that only very large cash flow of market corporations can in fact survive. You can imagine a farmer only making, and this is not a theory, a farmer only making in approximately 10 acres of its food production $20 US as a profit. You'd need a lot of 10 acres to make it reasonable for yourself to function. And again, these tools of loans allow large corporations with small amounts of investments, fully supported by the bank and half the time owned by them in one way or the other, actually to take local land. And the agricultural demise is made possible by riba-based economies. The last example I wanted to use, I'm not quite sure how much time I've actually got. I'll probably use less amount of time than I'm allocated. Maybe, inshallah, there'll be some questions and answers afterwards. And those speakers who have not had the opportunity to answer questions maybe can come and join me so I can get off the hook. So here is another example of beyond the direct issue of loan-based problems, and that is government subsidies. It is one of the most dangerous things that in fact exist. And government subsidies are nothing more than created money given to large corporations to usurp real wealth. And real wealth is in cows, in goats, in sheep, in land, and in water. Let me read for you from a book that I recommend for everybody I think you should read all of her books, and that is Vandana Shiva, and her book here called Water Wars, Privatization, Pollution and Profit. Let me read from there because this will give you an indication of what in fact is happening out there in relation to large corporations who are utilizing loans to usurp resources. The World Bank estimates the potential water market, that's an interesting term. I thought Riba was cool. The potential water market at $1 trillion. After the collapse of the technology stocks, the Fortune magazine identified the water business as the most profitable industry for investors. In fact, water today is one of the most common reasons for geopolitical conflicts. Large corporations such as the biotech giant and quite an evil manifestation, Monsanto, covet this lucrative market. Monsanto is currently plotting its entry into the water business and is anxiously eyeing the funding, in other words, these loans, and listen to what they have to say. This is the statement by the CEO of Monsanto. First, we believe that government policy discontinuities, in other words, you can actually go and buy this privatize these water supplies, rivers and lakes I'm talking about here, are likely, particularly in the area of water, and we will be well positioned. We will be well positioned when these discontinuities occur. Secondly, we are exploring the potential, listen to this carefully. Secondly, we are exploring the potential of non-conventional, low interest-based financing that may lower our investments or provide local country business building resources at the cost of the taxpayer. If it wasn't prohibited in Islam to swear, I think I would like to do it right now. But I'll move on. So, in government subsidies over here, what I'm showing here, the graph actually has not come through properly on the screen, but the largest graph on there shows where government subsidies actually go the most. It's approximately 79% of all global government subsidies. And it is to the most harmful environmental practices for agribusinesses. In other words, governments know that these are harmful, but they are not interested in your and my grandchildren's legacy and their future, but today their power and their friends' pocket, which is pretty big. The second is the neutral investments which don't actually make zero impact on the environment to a certain extent. And the smallest amount, it's only about 1.8%, is on positive environmental investments. So all of this talk that we have about green energy is a whole amount of hullabaloo. I want to move from here to now look at something which I really want to talk about. After knowing those 2 or 3 examples, what exactly is happening around us. Firstly, that we look at the world and we speak about the usury, we talk about the riba economy, GDP, etc., etc. And the new trend in the world is to speak about the environmental footprint. When I mean new, it's around about no more than 20 odd years old to speak about this as a matter of concern. And I'm talking about matter of concern at the level of mass acceptance rather than a few, those days apparently crazy scientists. Now, in this equation, today, what is happening is that the entire environment, inclusive of things like carbon emissions, etc., is doing nothing but commodifying nature. In other words, nature is given a price. If you can pay the price, you can do what you want. The carbon emission bogus hoax is the biggest hoax we have in terms of the environmental discussion. It simply shifts the problem into another bottleneck. And it doesn't do something which is most important. And when I'm going to bring the next part onto the screen, I want you to all remember something. Everything that I have said, if there are any importance in there, forget about it. Because the next point is the only thing I would like you to take home with. And that is you and me. Let us not blame the world. It is only because of our human consumerism that riba exists. Riba exists because there is a consistent, constant, and insistent need for you and I to be filled to our mouth. And that's the reason why. And when Mr. Hugo Salinas talked about to have an economy which is not based on interest, not based on debt, it will affect our way of consumption as well. And I want to bring these 3 things together, if I can. Let me see if this thing works properly here. So if we talk about the riba, etc., we can talk about the business profitability as the key element in that regard. Now, in these 2 worlds, we have to realize that there are 3 spheres we have to take into account. The first sphere is, without a doubt, as our religion from God, Islam and other religions allow the permissibility of profitability in business. So it's not something which is haram or prohibited or wrong or unethical. In fact, it is permissible. And we need to take that into account. But there is also the human welfare. What is happening today is that even the human welfare is commodified. At the same situation, we have the ecological sustainability. In other words, the ecology is understood by dollars and cents. You are understood at the social governance level by dollars and cents. I was offended a few years ago when the Australian government's equality scale between genders was based on how much women are able to earn today. As if our mothers and sisters are dollars and cents. Our mothers and sisters are worth more than dollars and cents. Our mothers and sisters in Islam is truly princess. And they're worth more than some commodified value. And in this regard, this entire discussion about riba, monetary systems, etc., in this world of economy, we need to bring discussions about these 3 things. Number 1, we need to return to business ethics, where profit over people is changed to profit for human welfare. Now, this is the reason why I'm saying this is the most dangerous things to talk about. Because I have not yet met a single corporation starting with Muslim corporations, to even think about this, because there is no, supposedly there is no money in here, you see. I assert that in fact there is. But it's not as much as Hugo, I think it was one of the speakers before said, you just might not be able to afford a BMW. Similarly, we can't just be concerned about the human welfare or just the ecology, that everything has to be staying put like that. In fact, we have been given a custodianship by the Creator to in fact interact with the environment, and therefore we need an ecosophical ethics. And ecosophy is different from ecology. Ecology is the measure, again, in dollars and cents and other numbers, but ecosophy is about your relationship with the environment, that we are part of this environment, and we need to put a proposition to humanity that every creation, every ant, every turtle, every tree, every elephant, and every human being is a sign of God. It's sacred. And we have a custodianship over this. And not until we return religion back to this equation, we should not really be talking about economy. And that's the problem with the Muslim Islamic finance banking, you see. Because they keep on talking about all of these Arabic names polished into the same system, because there is no God in it. And we need to bring God back into the system. And thirdly, the environmental ethics. That in fact we cannot be commodifying environment. We have to have bio-responsible bio-responsible production. And therefore, a very important point needs to be arisen here. You see what is happening today in the so-called green industry. Consumption is not being changed. Consumerism is not being changed. We are just producing it differently. So if you had an iPhone 4, I apologize to bring some brand names into the situation, iPhone 4S, and to keep it with the trend, you have your iPhone 5, you and I are the cause of the environmental degradation and the presence and existence of the riba-based economy. Simply making it something green does not make it right. Let me give you another example. Where does our gold and silver come from? We haven't answered that question in this discussion. There are slaves who bring your gold and silver that you and I want to mint. It's not until we return to the human rights of these people that there will not be any spiritual barakah, any spiritual blessing in what we've got in front of us. There are people, just about 6 months ago, I won't mention the name of the countries, a Gulf country was taken to account for siphoning gold outside of one of the African mines in order to sell you and me gold currency. Where is your gold coming from? Where is your silver mint coming from? It is not until we answer those questions. The riba questions is only a superfluous one. And so, when these three ethics come together and connect with each other, we are going to be talking less about economics and more about ethics. And I want to end in that regard. Do I have a little bit more time here? 2 more minutes, all right. Wow. So let me just move out of here. So let's talk about what I want to address here. Number one, I think it was, again, in the presentation of Dr. Bill Still, when he was speaking about life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, I want to briefly return ourselves to what is referred to as maqasid al-sharia, which is the higher objectives of our, why does law exist? If law exists for us to be able to go and rip and pillage the environment out there, it is no law. And so we have to recognize that the law that we have serves at a minimum base level as the maximum of 5, as the maxims of 5, principles of 5, as the sacred rights of humanity. Number one, life with well-being and safety without duress. Number two, liberty of religion as a moral compass, not CNN. Number three, equal access to knowledge attainment, that there should not be a cost to knowledge. that we are commodifying even the knowledge that is needed by human beings to contribute to society. Number 4, liberty of ownership of property. And number 5, protection of familial lineage and access. Some scholars would say there's a 6th, which is the honor and dignity of the human, but the dominant opinion is that these 5 include the protection of the honor and dignity of human beings. But it is by protecting these 5, and economy is simply one tool, it is not the end. And if in our framework and models we do not take these base principles into account, we will not be able to pursue the most of important questions, and that is pursuit of true happiness. And pursuit of true happiness is intimacy with God. It is a proposition for those who may not believe in God, but it is a fact for those who believe in God, and we need to return to that. And finally, if I can share with you 5 paradoxes for you to consider. Number 1, what are we doing with the economy? Are we controlling disease, or are we facilitating well-being? Are we promoting production, or are we promoting responsible production? Are we promoting economic growth, or are we promoting prosperity without growth in terms of GDP? Number 4, are we controlling carbon emissions, or are we nurturing environmental sustainability? Where is our money going? Number 5, are we commodifying human beings, a 9-to-5 job, so you're enslaved to large corporations, or is it to dignify human beings with all of the above? And if our economic system is not going to dignify and protect and maintain the honor of human beings, then we have failed in all of our discussions in relation to economy. And I end briefly here by the statement of the Prophet, peace and blessings of God Almighty be upon him, that if the human being had 2 values of money, he would wish for a 3rd. For nothing can fill the belly of the human being except dust. He means that we will not satiate ourselves with the temptations of this world until we die. And God forgives him who repents to him. In this regard, I want you to go back to reflect back on the original statement I had made with the Quranic verse about walking lightly. And if I could end with another short, hopefully a humorous statement by quoting Yoda, who said, on the ground, lightly you must walk, to feel the force you must. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Imam Afroz.